Welcome to Everyday Nothing, a podcast about nothing in particular. From culture to science to lifestyle, everything goes.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
This is episode 7
Oh,
of series 1.
your favorite number.
And what are we talking about?
We're talking about food.
Okay.
And that's one of my favorite topics, and I can speak about this for a day, for days. So, I want today's discussion to be more general rather than, talking about what our interests are. So, I thought we will take an objective look
Okay.
at food industry, food research, and trends, trends in nutrition, and how information about food is distributed and consumed by us all. What do you think about that?
That sounds interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually came across an article, I think it was, which talked about how people are more interested in these topics today than they were about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think last decade this has picked up. Think and post pandemic, especially when the whole world was in lockdown, people would consume a lot more information about what is healthy, what can help you live a better life. I think that's also one of the reasons why a lot of documentaries were made and a lot of funding was raised for research in this field, I think. Yeah, it can be quite confusing about, which source to believe and how to consume, because there's a lot of information out there about food. What do you
It's a
think?
huge industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Both research that's going on and the mainstream media output, that means the non-academic stuff,
Yeah.
is ever increasing, and it reminds me of those years in the 60s where you had cigarette research, and then the
Right.
subsequent decade you had research on fat, uh, and then fossil fuels and climate change, and then you have food now.
Yeah.
It hasn't reached the same level of, let's say, sensationalism, but I feel like it's going to get there at some point.
Yeah.
But the thing to note is that just as all of these other examples I just stated, you've got people influencing the output of whether it's research or mainstream publications. That's not to
Absolutely.
say that the academics are biased or wrong. They're doing their job well, at least as I know. But the way it's being reported is where the problem lies.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's also because there's some, um, I think there's a conflict between influencers and also academicians sometimes,
That bothers me so much. I don't think we should even be taking those two names in the same sentence, but people are today.
Yeah.
And that whole idea that you have to represent a number of opinions is a misleading notion, because the opinions of an influencer and the opinions of an academic are two different things. They're not
Yes.
opinions either,
Yes.
right? An academic doesn't get doesn't have the luxury of
Mm.
having random opinions on things.
Yeah.
Influencers do.
Yes, and also accessibility. People can access an influencer easily compared to an academician, and also the language that they use is easier to digest and convincing. Obviously, they are influencers, so they influence you at a very, sometimes very subliminal levels. I have noticed that I would consume a lot of information and apply it quickly when it had come from an influencer, especially when I was struggling with my own health. I noticed that you become gullible or vulnerable to the trends of, protein is good, fat is good, bullet coffee is good, and there's so much around white rice, there's gluten, and there's another set of nutritionists who emphasize on go local, eat colorful, and then there's so many other layers to it. And when you say go gluten free and you've grown up eating, let's say, chapatis or bread, it becomes very difficult for you to understand and go spend just for yourself. Whole family will be eating one thing and you have to take another route. But I think this trend also became popular because of the rise of lifestyle disorders, also lifestyle uh, concerns around diabetes, hypertension, hormonal imbalance, obesity. They influenced not only how we consumed food but also our relationship with food. you know there's a lot of research going on, I think, in Stanford, if I'm correct, about mindset on consumption of food. Annie Crum, or I don't remember correct name of the researcher, she has this mind body lab where she says that the moment people picked up a milkshake over a smoothie, a healthy smoothie, the kind of guilt that they felt influenced the kind of hormones or the kind of neurotransmitter that was released in the body that influenced how that food was digested, how that food was received by the body. So when you're thinking like I'm consuming something healthy or I'm consuming something, I don't know, something that I don't like, but it is healthy, but your body is maybe at some level rejecting it, the chances of its acceptance from the body itself also changes. So even though people who consumed milkshake, if there was guilt involved, the way it was consumed was the way body received it was different. So there's also that angle to it, that how you think about food influences how it sits well or not with your body.
Yeah, I think you brought up a few interesting points. One of the things that I recently read, I think is in Rex Woodbury's newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
he made an observation on how people like Huberman, who runs a Huberman lab,
Yes, I think
they
I've
sit in.
heard about Anagram in Huberman Lab.
Mhm.
Yes.
So Rex Woodbury makes this point where he says these people, they fall in between influencers and academics.
Yes.
They are perceived to be more reliable than influencers, but
Mm-hmm.
in the academic community,
Hmm?
it's pretty glaring that they're not.
Oh,
And what happens, and he really points that out well in his newsletter, that as the popularity of this specific person increases, and keep in mind, I haven't listened or watched or anything of that sort,
mm-hmm.
um, you know, uh,
Yep.
with Huberman Lab. But I'm just going based on what I have read here, where he points out to how over time
Mm-hmm.
pseudoscience slowly starts to make its way because it's not about the science anymore. It's about
Yes.
selling something. It's about selling an idea. It's about selling something with the perceived belief that something that looks academic
Hmm.
automatically gains trust. And
Yes.
the other interesting thing that you brought up was this whole idea of guilt that people would feel. And I think it's very true because our body reacts to these things, to every decision we make, really. And this is just one of those several decisions you make. And the more you consume ideas that make you feel guilty upon picking something else, you
Yes.
start slipping into a cycle to get out of which it becomes much, much difficult because it doesn't make you feel great for having done what you just did.
Yeah.
And that doesn't give you the willpower to course correct, as it were. And then
Yes.
you keep slipping further down.
About Huberman Lab, I think I have followed him religiously. You know, some of his advices, some of his ideas about how, making scientific information more accessible and affordable, free of cost. All those principles I really admire. And I know that there is some discomfort about the way he's advertising a few things, but I think that's for the sustenance. But I get what you're saying. Sometimes when you gain popularity, it can change how you, put out information and how you package it and whom you invite on your show. So all of that can be influenced. But I think it's much better than bite-sized information that goes out on internet without any head or tail about where it is from and what is the scientific process behind it. I think this is much better than you know those bite-sized information that's there. But there are also a lot of documentaries that have come out. I think one of those that I watched during, I think, either pandemic or before that, it was called What the Health or something on Netflix.
Interesting name.
Yeah. And they emphasized on how milk is not meant for humans at all. I mean, cow milk is not meant for human beings at all. There is some casein in it, there's some kind of glucose in it that is something that we can't digest, and it's just meant for the cow's baby. And there's a lot of information like that, and how egg is not healthy. I think there was a push towards kind of
Veganism, as it were.
yeah, it could be that. I still don't, I haven't made up my mind about those things. I am a vegetarian, but I couldn't understand how those researches were done with such close tie between academia and industry, and who was funding those researches. And I think there is lack of information about that to the public, and that also creates a lot of confusion regarding the trends that we were discussing about. Sometimes this is carcinogenic, sometimes it's something else, and then BPA is healthy, Teflon is healthy. You eat in mud pots, or you drink water from a copper, but there is copper toxicity. You don't really understand how to make the choice because there's so many options, there's so much information out there, and you are the one who has to choose now. And there is decision fatigue, and I had come to that stage so many times myself when I was making choices about my diet. You feel like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to go with the flow, like whatever, and you end up harming yourself sometimes because you're neither choosing go with the flow nor are you rigid, and there is midway which keeps swaying. Nutritionists helped me. Having a nutritionist on board helped me a lot in understanding my body and making sense of these macronutrients, micronutrients, minerals, my own period cycle. So that was helpful. But people who can't afford a nutritionist, because oh my god, you have to pay a lot for a good nutritionist. So there is that chunk of population who are either deprived or for whom this information is inaccessible, and unfortunately those are the people who are in need. The elite know that three macaroons and a big a chunk of cake is not really good for their health, even if they can afford it. So they can also afford a good, tasty salad, also. But people who, depend on fast food, people who depend on ready to make food, those are the people who need the access. If you look at the statistics on who is at risk, you will see that chunk between the elite and also the unprivileged. There is a middle, semi privileged or middle class sometimes, is mostly at risk. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of conflicting information out there.
Mm-hmm. That's true. One of the things that, again, you brought up, interestingly enough, was about the funding.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been seeing is that I don't know if this is going to lead to a negative effect,
Hmm.
but it might. There's a lot of adjacent industries popping up around veganism,
Yeah.
particularly vegan supplements. And I was recently looking at how last year this vegan supplement called Dr. Vegan
Hmm.
raised a six-figure sum.
Okay.
And the moment you see that there is a business
Mm-hmm.
that's creating vegan supplements,
Hmm.
then they need to sell it.
Yes.
They need to profit from it.
Yeah.
And so it starts to become a question of how much of it is industry driven and how
Yeah.
much of it is science driven. But on the other hand, there is science. It's not that there's
Yes.
no science at all. For example, well, the science is not of the kind that you might expect.
Mm-hmm.
The science is of the kind that says, okay, meat eaters have so much environmental impact,
Mm-hmm.
whereas vegetarians have, say, 30% less
Hmm.
or something of that sort. Don't quote the numbers. I'm just giving you a rough figure, but that's the general idea you have. And that's where the science exists. But the other thing the science has always done, as any nutritionist might tell you, is that besides specific requirements for your body,
Mm-hmm.
the general advice is always have a balanced diet.
Yes.
There's no nutrition worth their salt that's going to tell you straight away go do keto,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That sort of extremes, they just don't exist. But in the world of influencers,
Yes.
they do.
Yes.
And in the world of science, on the other hand, you have a lot of things about how making certain minuscule variations in choices and what you eat can have rolling impact
Yeah.
down the line. And that's the kind of thing that you actually have scientists doing, which brings me to my point. It's boring. It's true, it's factually correct, but like so many other things, academic progress appears to be boring. And because it doesn't grab you by your collar and tell you something that's going to blow your mind,
Yeah, it's not provocative.
every other day, it's not provocative,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
People just dismiss it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And one last thing I want to mention, which again you brought up, which is kind of funny, carcinogens and coffee is like a match made in heaven. We've had for decades. I think if you look up newspapers, you'll have every single day an article on this.
Yep.
And one day it's going to be that coffee is carcinogenic in nature or somehow exacerbates the possibility of you
Yes.
getting cancer. And the other day is the exact opposite.
Yeah, and it's a huge industry,
It
coffee
is an industry.
There's coffee chains, and there's different kinds of coffees, and there are people importing coffee from Africa and India.
True.
So many
True.
industries
And
built.
which again begs the question, how is this happening?
Yep.
And it has to be as simple as something that you go back to. Cigarettes. Someone said cigarette smoking is bad, and then the entire industry lobbied and they said all doctors prefer Camel cigarettes. If you know the ad from the 60s, really famous ad, which had a doctor, white male doctor, smoking a cigarette, saying, I like, I'm not really sure what it is, but he says he likes a certain something about Camel.
Right.
And that's a really famous ad because here you have a very bold picture being put forward using a doctor thereby taking all the scientific credibility and reliability you might associate with such a figure in society. And he's telling you this, so why do you have to question anything anymore?
Yep.
And the same thing's happening, but not to that scale, with so many of these other things. And it all comes down to one simple idea that science, if you were to go to science and ask for the answers, science doesn't have all the answers, nor do influencers. But whatever answers science does have, you really need to take it, understand that it's not going to be, as you correctly put it, provocative. It's going to be measured.
Yep.
It's going to come with a lot of asterisks saying it works under these conditions. We're still figuring out some of the other stuff.
Yes.
People don't want that.
Yeah.
People are used to getting some sort of in your face punch of an answer.
True. And I see a lot of fear mongering also in the industry, and they are sort of vilifying a macronutrient and then sort of idealizing something overnight. I also see there's mismatch sometimes between what physicians say and what nutritionists say. There's sort of, no collaboration there at times, especially some of us who visit them for lifestyle disorders, who consult for, let's say, hormonal imbalance or menopause related issues or fertility related issues. So there's, sugar, for instance. There's a lot of confusion about sugar, and now they're reaching a consensus that it's generally in large quantity it's bad. There is some consensus around that, but alternatives are good, not good. There's no consensus.
Carcinogenic in the case of
stevia, and there's this gum also, there's preservatives in that.
But the other thing I just want to point out here, not to interrupt, but we had the knowledge that sugar was quite possibly harmful in when taken in larger than certain quantities way back in the 70s, 80s. But then the entire industry, which was in one way or the other involved in sugar, lobbied and made fat the villain because the name says so.
Okay, and now there's so many people up and about making that into the hero. That's the protein, and you have to take it in.
Right.
It's healthy fat.
Right. The inertia is basically taking you in the other direction now.
Yes. And there's so much discussion about sugar in other forms, glucose in other forms also. They've vilified even fruits in large quantities. If you read up literature, they're talking about how fruits are also forms of sugar, and you need to consume them in limited quantity, and you should consume them at the end of the meal, or no, you have to consume them in the beginning of the meal. You have to take them as a
confusing, isn't it?
Yes, and in the middle of your breakfast and lunch. And there's so much confusion about intermittent fasting, and also whether you should skip breakfast. I grew up thinking that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And now they're saying you can do away with breakfast. And then there is circadian rhythm synchronizing with your food. There's so much information about how you should consume, when you should consume, in what combination you should consume. Some say don't eat the apple right away, just the apple, you eat it with some form of nut butter, something that's fat that can...
Maybe the peanut butter industry is propagating that myth.
Yeah, and there was... Peanut butter was a hero a while ago, and now they are saying it's just fat. There's just 2 grams of protein in it. There's nothing. And then I don't know when the wheel will turn, and we're back to square one again. Especially some of us who can't afford nutritionists all our life. At different phases of your life, you require different advice. Going by the globalization and going by how our bodies are adapting to the climate, we will need information that is, and that's why I said maybe Huberman Lab, and there's also food farmer or somebody who reads the labels and fine prints behind written behind the products and says which has how much sugar. Yeah, there are a lot of people who are doing that work. What you pointed out, in between influencer and academicians, there's that chunk, that slot of people who do this. I think at least it has a function, that population, that might be good for people who can't afford a full-time nutritionist. But I think government should consider, this issue, because it is important. It can reduce the burden from, healthcare system itself, if you can take care of what goes onto your plate.
Yes, in fact, a lot of the scientific output in the UK, at least, has to do with how much shift in the dietary habits of people can save the NHS money, which is
Wow.
based on, as you might guess, how much the NHS is spending on patients, etc., coming in because of these issues.
Right.
So that's that's where the science is. And I do want to mention that we have taken the names of a lot of people over the course of this episode. We don't mean to either vilify them or prop them up
Endorse.
or
Yeah.
endorse them. Yes, we're simply discussing them in the interests
Yeah.
of understanding where they stand. People like Huberman, for example, whether it's your opinion that they have started to peddle some form of pseudoscience or not, the
Yes.
thing that you cannot deny is, given the popularity of that podcast on Apple Podcasts, particularly where it shot up, if I'm not mistaken, to the first or fourth position
Ooh.
in the number of times it was listened to, shared, etc. Its popularity has got people talking about these issues.
Yeah. It has brought the topics to the table, like,
Right.
at least in the tea time topics. Yes.
But that is a very misleading notion, in my opinion, to think that because people are talking about it, that's a good thing.
Or
Because
they are talking about
they could
things
be talking
correctly.
about all the wrong things,
Yes.
right?
There's also a, I think, YouTuber in India called FitTuber.
Okay.
Very popular when it comes to dietary and exercise information. But there's so many controversies about that as well. And there was a diet that really helped me with my condition, and something that didn't work. But he has a Hindi channel, he has another English channel, and there are shorts, but very popular in millions. The popularity and fan following is in
Right.
millions.
I think it helps to question why academics are not doing this.
Yeah, why are they
And,
not?
well, my opinion, quite simply, is that this is not a very good way to put something which is really, really nuanced. And that's why they're not doing it. You, as a respectable academic, you cannot put yourself in front of a camera for 15 minutes and go, "This is a fact," right? And if you can actually come up with such a fact, then it's not going to be a really interesting fact, and your channel won't probably sell. But
Maybe we should look into YouTube where academicians are making YouTubes that are boring. They're not making it to the top
yes,
few.
and there are
ranks.
those amongst academic circles. But then the other thing is, amongst academic circles, if you put aside YouTube, etc., you know how we have publications that are peddling pseudoscience? In academics, you have a lot of writing on this. Blogs of professors who are constantly working on this, for example, where they don't have to openly rigorously work on a paper, but they can still give a measured scientific opinion in about 500 to 1,000 words.
Yeah.
But people don't read it.
Yes.
So that they are doing it, but just not in the way that sells provocatively.
Yeah, and you brought another thing, really important one to the table. That's about how much information is given on the products in UK compared
Yes.
to in India. I see a lot more emphasis on preservatives, and what is there's highlighted ingredients, there's sulfides, there is wheat, the nuts, or everything highlighted. And there's also precision with what they are doing, this information output. On the cover, you see baked, but the calories compared to baked and fried. And difference between a dark chocolate version of the same thing and a milk chocolate version of the same brand. They are highlighting the calories, they're highlighting what goes in it. And I saw on one of the most popular cosmetic brand, they have mentioned the scientific process. When they're claiming it works on 98% of women, they've written 24 self-report. Self-subjects are involved. And then they have written 250 verified purchases but not followed longitudinally. There is some information that's given here, which I didn't see the same being given by the same brand. It was not there in India. It's pretty popular cosmetic brand.
And I'm sure there's a reason why they've omitted that, because it probably hurts sales.
Yeah.
And they would rather not put it. That's an interesting thing, because you can be very nihilistic about it and say, well, who reads that stuff anyway? But I think that's where change starts.
Yes.
Putting it in and having people, in passing at least, get
Yes.
accustomed to words and statements of this sort and start wondering, well, what does this mean?
Yep. It's not about blame game or,
No.
Industry should take care of it or the consumer should take care of it. I think there is shared responsibility because they are also in business and you are the consumer. You should be informed too. But there is higher responsibility on the businesses because...
To not missell.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do not missell. Do not mislead the consumer. I've seen some advertisements where they just highlight something to distract you from what is lacking in the product. And I see there is now an increased interest in the consumers to read the label. I've seen people read the label behind the milk packet as well.
Right, not the price label.
Yes, not the price.
The nutrition label.
The nutrition label. So there is growing interest. But I don't know how that will translate in developing countries where education is still an issue. So you need to be an ethical provider, ethical business, ethically run business.
Easier said than done for a lot of people, I assume. The other thing that was done, I might be wrong on this, but I think it was motivated by the assumption that a lot of people wouldn't appreciate the rigorous scientific statements. So they had all these colored labels, right? My problem with those colored labels is you can sidestep them really quickly because all the qualification happens behind closed doors.
Yep.
So you can really put an asterisk where it's convenient to you to sidestep it and go from red label to a green label and you're like, I'm great.
Yes.
But so those labels don't work. And I would strongly prefer to have, as you described, a detailed description of exactly what's going on.
Yes. And sometimes misleading happens. I don't know if it is on purpose. I think it is on purpose because when they say sugar just 3%, and then you read the label below, there is dextrose, there is corn syrup, there is other kinds of harmful ingredients. You might as well just consume sugar and raise your blood glucose than accumulating all those other preservatives.
There's actually a very interesting story behind that. It used to be that the earlier legislation, it was here in Europe as well as in the US, it was only for sugar. And so a lot of these companies that were using sugar realized that they can use sugar to somehow make their products more appealing, started to come up with other names for it.
Right.
And so they started putting in all of those names, saying anything like this. But they haven't really found a universal definition that puts everything together. So now there are a lot of companies that have entire departments dedicated to coming up with names for what is pretty much just sugar.
Oh my goodness.
And it's a huge, huge game. It's like, can you come up with something that the whatever food ministries in your country is not going to cover or realize, and then you can put it in the packet, But you'll still
Yes.
claim a little bit of sugar because otherwise it'll be really suspicious.
Yes. It is challenging, and I hope we figure out a way to navigate this and eat healthy, stay healthy.
I think a bit of a this might be a bit of a socialist solution that I see, but if governments can somehow subsidize some of these products so that they're not enticed to relying entirely on selling sugar to make money,
Yeah.
maybe they can reach a certain point where they have enough breathing space to come up with an alternative without hitting their margins.
Yes.
And so over time, the government can slowly wean off, and
Right.
you will have companies that are actually doing the right thing without affecting their profits, which
Yeah.
shouldn't be the case in an ideal society. The individuals, the people, and their health should come first, but do we live in an ideal society?
Yeah, and that's why I was speaking about that shared responsibility. And I realized it's not really equal distribution of responsibility, but how do we navigate this? How do we arrive at a solution that works for the economy and for the people? And does economy has to be at the cost of people, or how does this
Yeah,
even work?
I think it's a bit like offsetting your carbon footprint, where individuals are saying not going to take my car out for 3 days in a week while Taylor Swift flies a jet wherever the hell she goes, and
You're gonna angry by
that's
so many
okay. But
Swifties.
I mean, I'm sure the Swifties value the earth just as much they value Taylor Swift, so they should also be concerned about it.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just Taylor Swift for that matter. Elon Musk
Yep.
does the same thing. Lots of people do it. Trump probably does the same thing. People
Hmm.
with private jets and private yachts
Yeah.
generally do the same thing. And they have
Yes.
huge carbon footprints in comparison with the common person who walks down to the grocery store.
Yep.
And yet
Yes.
it's the common person who's always told, here's what you can do.
You can do. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So it's the same thing here. You have sugar or you have some other food industry and they're doing all this and they're going, well, this is what you can do, individual, the poor guy there.
Yep.
But is that really a solution? Maybe we can watch what we eat.
Yes.
We can be more critical about thinking about these
Yeah.
things.
Cook at
But
home.
cook at home.
If you can afford, if you have the time, cook
Yeah.
at home.
But you can always support, family-run tiny restaurants
Yes,
in your neighborhood.
not the
You can
monopolized
don't-
people who
exactly.
are just there for the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then rope the industry in. Pull them in, rein them in, make sure they follow the rules that they're supposed to be following rather than lobbying politicians to just keep breaking them.
And listen to your body. It has its preferences and it will be loud and clear about its preferences if you truly listen. I think there are answers within us. This is getting philosophical, but listen to your body.
Yes.
If something is not sitting well with your body, it will scream out loudly. And if you are eager to listen, if you're keen enough to listen, you will figure out what is the best match for
And
your
if there's
body.
jazz playing in the next room, your body will be humming. We just want to take a moment to remind you that if you like this episode, if you like this podcast, do not hesitate to share it with everybody you know.
Yes.
Be a nuisance to them and tell them to listen to this as well.
Let's start the conversation about food.
And other things. Cartoons, we talked about that. And travel
Jokes.
and jokes. Let's not talk about all of those things. We are available everywhere.
Okay.
RSS, Apple Podcasts,
Oh.
Spotify,
Ooh.
Amazon,
Yay.
Stitcher,
Yay.
Pandora,
Woohoo.
Google Podcasts.
Come here.
Nothing for that? Okay. YouTube Music, Pocket Cast, Radio, Public Castbox, Sirius XM, and anywhere else you can imagine, including Mars, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, and a few other planets.
Come find us.
Until the next episode, have a lovely several days.
Enjoy your food, everyone. Bye.